Hello and welcome to the Federal News Sense. I'm S. Srinivasan. The opposition is protesting on the streets against skyrocketing prices. The Finance Minister, Nirmala Sitharaman, while replying to a debate in the Parliament, has promised to bring down inflation. So, what's inflation? How does one experience inflation? Why it is important? And what does one make of it when Nirmala Sitharaman says that inflation in India is lower than that of the United States or Europe? Let's discuss this in this episode of The News Sense. When you order a kilo of tomato and realize the price has gone up by a few rupees, you know you are facing higher prices or inflation. Next week, when you are told the inflation has come down, you expect a drop in the price of tomato. On the contrary, the price may have actually gone up. Puzzled? Inflation is not an absolute number. It denotes rate of change, the speed at which the prices are going up or down. So it is rare that the prices actually come down. Over a period of time, when consumer with a short memory gets used to a new level of higher prices and starts complaining only when the prices start moving up rapidly. Would you believe the price of a liter of petrol, which costs, say, rupees 100 today, was only around rupees 7 in the 1980s? Now, inflation is not about one or two items. In an economy, inflation is caused when prices of a whole lot of items go up over a period of time. At present, worldwide, a higher prices of energy and food have caused inflation. This has happened at a time when the global economy has not fully come out of the pandemic-induced shock. When the energy prices go up, it feeds into other parts of the economy, including the services sector. For example, transport and restaurant, and causes widespread inflation. Indian government did recognize the fact that higher petroleum prices were contributing to inflation and therefore it slashed the excise duties. But that is not the standard practice followed by economists to cool the prices. We'll discuss more of that later. Inflation is also caused by expectations. If people expect prices to go up, they will start cutting back on expenses. When companies expect higher inflation, they may increase the price of the goods and services they offer. In India, the consumer goods companies start reducing the size of packages. Toothpaste, soap, and gutka packages start shrinking while the printed prices may remain the same. There is an implicit hike because the quantity reduces. When prices go up, employees start expecting higher wages. But the managements may be thinking of just the opposite, either slashing the bonuses or worse, even downsizing. What do the poor do when prices go up? They literally tighten their belts and change their food habits. The sale of pickles and papad go up in rural areas because they replace expensive green vegetables. Consumption of pulses and oils drop because they are the most pricey on the grocery list. There are a whole lot of poor in India as 21% of our population or 270 million live below the poverty line at subsistence levels. Economists measure the change in the prices of goods and services by creating an index using a basket of items. India has two indexes, CPI, Consumer Price Index, and WPI or Wholesale Price Index. Within the consumer or retail index, food and beverages has a weight of 46%, fuel 7%, and all other items put together, called core, is 47%. While WPI has been hovering around 15% for 3 months and in double digits for over 12 months, the CPI has been way above the target rate of 4% for over a year and above the tolerance level of 6% for 6 months. Now let's discuss what caused inflation in the West and poor countries such as India. Till October 2019, the West did not face any inflation. As pandemic began to spread in 2020, the fallout began to impact the economies. Lockdowns hit both goods and services, especially the high-touch industries such as hotel, transport, and tourism. Employees lost jobs or faced furloughs. To cushion the suffering, governments offered huge cash benefits to its citizens. Once the pandemic started to wane, the governments began to spend in a big way to revive the economy. The US alone has spent $5 trillion for pandemic stimulus. EU launched a 750 billion euro program to stimulate the economy. The people in poor nations were worse off because their governments could not afford the kind of dose the West could. Many workers had lost jobs. Early on in the pandemic, India saw one of the biggest migrations in the world as millions, unable to survive in the cities, began to go back to their villages, some literally walking hundreds of kilometers. Once lockdown started lifting, Indian government unveiled a 21 trillion rupee or $282 billion program in phases to stimulate the economy. It offered food and direct benefit transfer schemes covering the vulnerable section of the population. Besides these schemes, it also initiated a number of other measures to revive the economy. The fallout of pandemic has affected the global economy in myriad ways. In the US, the economists are facing a strange situation where with inflation touching 9%, highest in 40 years, there is a fear of recession. But the job market is booming with extremely low unemployment rate. In Europe, as nations were wriggling out of pandemic, the Ukraine war that began in February 2022 hit them badly, affecting food and energy prices. The global trends spilled over to Indian economy. Oil prices that went down initially after the pandemic swung back to higher levels, ballooning India's import bill and widening both trade and current account deficits. Since trade deficit denotes the difference between imports and exports, we are importing more than exporting. The current account deficit includes services and remittances as well, and also denotes the saving investment gap in the economy. The current account deficit at present, hovering above 4% of GDP, is manageable but remains an area of concern. While the Indian government claimed an imported inflation, not everyone is convinced. According to left of center economists, the government's mishandling of domestic economy too contributed to higher inflation. They blame the center for eroding its own tax base by offering concession to big companies in the form of cut in corporate tax. In October 2019, before the pandemic, Modi government had surprised everyone by bringing down corporate tax to 25% for existing companies and 15% to new ones. Further, some of the non-BJP ruled states complained that the GST regime compounded the matters for them as the taxation power reduced and forced them to be dependent on items outside GST framework, such as petroleum products, which in turn further fueled overall inflation. Governments the world over try to manage inflation in two ways, through monetary policy or through fiscal policy, and even better, a combination of two. Central banks such as RBI in India or Federal Reserve in the US raise interest rates to suck out the money from the system and cool the economy. When interest rates go up, the mortgage rates also go up. Borrowing becomes expensive for a consumer as she has to pay higher EMIs for housing and retail loans. Contrary to this, the deposit rates improve. Since we are in an interconnected economy, when interest rates in the US go up, global investments start withdrawing from developing economies such as India and invest in the developed markets. These funds are invested in the developed markets. The governments also try to keep the fiscal situation under control by managing deficits because higher deficits fuel inflation. Since the fiscal deficit is a gap between total income and total expenses, it becomes a difficult task to manage. This is because, on the one hand, the governments have to spend more to stimulate the economy, and on the other, find new ways to keep the revenue going. In India, the fiscal deficit is hovering over 6.7% as against the target of containing it at 4% of GDP. Nirmala Sitharaman, defending her position in the parliament over spiraling prices, said that the government was not in denial but was pursuing a more targeted approach. She said Indian economy was doing much better as compared to developing economies. It is true that while Indian inflation rate is at 7% and that of US is 9%, but while US may already be facing a technical recession, there is no such fear in India. But there is no apple to apple comparison here when it comes to the two economies, as poor gets more hit by Indian inflation in India, and we have a large chunk of poor, as I explained earlier. Inflation on its own does not cause recession, but when governments slam the brakes on the economy too hard to cool the prices, it may get out of hand and depress the economy, leading to recession. So basically, it boils down how the central banks and governments do a fine balance between their monetary and fiscal policies. Inflation is an extremely sensitive issue in a price conscious nation such as India, as it can make or break governments. Political parties certainly understand this very well. That's why even a moribund Congress is trying to mobilize crowds against the price rise. The Modi regime, on the other hand, is trying to send a signal that all is well. Thanks for watching. For more such videos, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Also, log on to www.thefederal.com to get more news and updates. Thank you.
Subscribe to the Federal's YouTube page for more interesting updates.